Hello, friends, and welcome. My name is Katie Grosh, and I'm the Faith Initiative Coordinator at Grace Farms Foundation. I am so delighted to welcome you to this time of conversation with philosopher Susan Wolf to discuss her book, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. Our conversation today is part of the Books on Faith and Meaning series, oriented around the Faith Initiative's core question: what is the shape of flourishing life? As we engage with different texts each month, from ancient classics to newly published books, from a variety of religious and philosophical traditions, we ask together these important questions of meaning and purpose, and do so in the company of others. We know that reading is just a portion of our journey, but we believe that these texts can connect us to people, histories, and ideas that each can contribute substantially to our quest for flourishing life, both for our own lives and for our communities. Before we begin our conversation today, I want to give a quick reminder that this webinar meeting is being recorded and will be available on our website afterwards to watch, rewatch, or to share with a friend. And if you are with us live today, welcome. Please feel free to use the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen at any point during the discussion. So no need to wait until the end of the hour. You can just type your questions into the Q&A box as they occur to you, and Matt will weave them in throughout our conversation. And with that, I would like to introduce Matthew Croasmun, Faith Initiative Director at Grace Farms Foundation.
Thanks, Katie. Each semester in the Life Worth Living course at Yale, I find my students deeply drawn to two rather different modern traditions and their visions of the good life. The first is a tradition in the rigorous sense, utilitarianism. Their students aren't drawn necessarily to all the details and certainly not all the rigor. But the general sense that we are each universally accountable to contribute to the well-being and benefit of all, they feel the weight of that strongly. The second is what we call in the course expressive individualism. And again, students don't necessarily feel the weight of every single detail, but students definitely feel the weight of responsibility for actualizing their most authentic selves, that they feel that should they fail to do this, they would have missed something incredibly important about what it means to be human. And I have to say, it's not just my students. I feel the pull from each of these ideals. What's especially striking to me is the dilemma that these two pulls can seem to place us in. That we are responsible both to actualize our most authentic selves and to contribute equally to the well-being of every sentient being, past, present, and future. Who could hope to accomplish either of these tasks, much less both? The popularity of Friedrich Buechner's quote about vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need, he says. I think that popularity comes, at least in part, from our culture's desperate hope that it might be possible to fulfill both of these demands at once. In our book for today, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters, our guest, philosopher Susan Wolf, offers us a way forward from something like at least these two cross pressures, in part by showing how the two come together, and in part by showing how when we reduce life to either just self-fulfillment or just moral duty, we miss out on some of the richest dynamics and relationships in our lives. Meaning in life, she says, is something else, a third category with which we ought to familiarize ourselves as we try to understand the shape of the good life. Our guest, Susan Wolf, is Edna J. Curry Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She works chiefly in ethics and its close relations in philosophy of mind, philosophy of action, political philosophy, and aesthetics. Her interests range widely over moral psychology, value theory, and normative ethics. She is author of a number of articles and books, including, of course, our book for today, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. Professor Wolf, welcome. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
You frame your proposal about meaning in life in terms of two commonly held ideas about the good life, neither of which you think are the same as meaning in life, but both of which help us understand something maybe about the kind of meaning we pursue in our lives and what motivates those pursuits. I wonder if we shouldn't start with those two ideas. You call the first one the fulfillment view. What's that view say a good life is?
Well, so if you don't mind, I'd actually like to start a little bit earlier than that.
Sure, great.
To two views about what people seek in life or do in life that actually aren't yet about meaning at all. One is just happiness. I just want to live a life that's happiest. The other is morality. I want to live a life that's as morally good as possible. Against those two dimensions or ways of thinking about what should I do, what will make me happiest, what will be the morally best thing to do, the idea of what's the most meaningful life, steps outside of either of those. A life might not be meaningful even though it's full of pleasure, and it might not be meaningful even though it's morally good. So so then we get to something like the fulfillment view, which is to say meaning requires not just pleasure, it requires something like a certain kind of pleasurable quality. So the fulfillment view, as I think of it, comes close to the idea, find your passion and go with it. I mean, that, to live a meaningful life is to live a fulfilling life, is to live a life in which you're pursuing passions, which is something kind of more and different from just pleasure. And might not even be all pleasure. So actually, I think it's not totally unrelated to the idea you opened with about authenticity. I mean, usually, the sense of what's the authentic me is often closely related to what am I really passionate about? What really gets me as an individual going, excited, gripped. And the fulfillment view is, whatever that is, pursue that, and that will be a meaningful life. The other view, what I call, get involved with something larger than yourself kind of view. I mean, that's also a common view about what it is to live a meaningful life, to attach yourself to or devote yourself to something larger than yourself, which seems to be independent of whether it's authentic, whether you have a special connection to it. It's actually independent, perhaps, to whether you have, get any kind of special joy out of it. It's like, just do something good with yourself, and that's actually more closely related to maybe the utilitarian longing that you mentioned in your introduction, that, utilitarianism says, do what's best for the world, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Well, that is way larger than yourself, like the greatest number, right? And, even if that means sacrificing your happiness completely, that's, the right thing to do is whatever is going to maximize the overall good to maybe all sentient beings or something like that. That would be a very strong example of getting involved with something larger than yourself. And so a second view about meaning is that that's what meaningfulness amounts to.
Yeah. I wonder if you could, thank you for breaking that up into two steps for me. That helps me better understand actually what you've written. It was really, really helpful. So taking so I'm going to go back a step because I found some of the examples that you gave really, really helpful in the book when you're sort of just helping us realize that there are some things that we pursue in life, even though we wouldn't say they are, neither that they make us happy particularly, nor that they feel like some sort of moral duty. I wonder if you could give us some examples, because I found the examples often really, really helpful.
Sure. So the two kinds of things that seem to me kind of both common and personally serious about what gives intuitively what gives meaning to my life are examples involving individuals I love and examples involving kind of activities or realms of value that I love or have a passion for. So my examples connect to those. One of the examples from the book was staying up all night to get the Halloween costume for my child exactly right in time for her school parade. Right. I confess that was actually. It was my mother who was the seamstress in the family. So I made her do this for both for me and for my kids. But in any case, it was like, you stay up all night sewing this butterfly costume. It's not like this is the way I can be happiest is by, staying up all night and doing this. I'm not doing it. And it doesn't even matter whether it would make me happy. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for my daughter's sake. I'm doing it for her, so that she will be happy and because I love her. I mean, it's love for my daughter, and which brings about a care for her happiness. So on the one hand, I'm not doing it for my sake at all. I'm doing it for her sake. On the other, right. So it's not self-interest. It's also not morality, because there is no moral duty to make the perfect Halloween costume for your daughter. So that was one example. Another example, not surprisingly, perhaps has to do with my, philosophical activities. And in particular, at least some of the time, when I'm writing essays or books, it's very difficult and unpleasant and frustrating and stressful. But I want it to be really good. I mean, I want my work, I want the ideas to be as clear and as compelling as possible. I want the writing to be as graceful and effective as possible. So I will again sometimes stay up way later. I will sacrifice fun activities and so on. So it seems to me when especially after I've achieved tenure and I'm not insecure about my professional success. When I work on the, fifth draft and saying, no, I'm not going to go hiking. I'm not doing this in order to do it. It is not for my sake that I'm doing it. On the other hand, it's certainly not, again, no moral obligation to write the best possible essay or even any essay in philosophy. After you've done, you've got a decent essay there, you could just go ahead and it wouldn't hurt you and it wouldn't hurt, it wouldn't be morally required. So what is that about, right? Why am I doing it? One might ask. And I think my answer is I'm doing it for the sake of, as a way of honoring the value of good philosophy. I mean, of, good ideas, of, intellectual, expansion, not for me, not for the world, not for like moral goods for something beyond that. But again, like as with my daughter, my butterfly costume daughter, it's something I love. I mean, philosophy and the values that philosophy capture is something I love. So the thought is, I'm doing these things out of love for something other than myself, which is not the same as doing it because I feel morally required to do it or doing it for my own sake.
Yeah. I want to come back to love's reasons in just a moment. I find that category so evocative. But if I could, I'm going to play a little bit. I'm advocate for a couple of pushbacks that I don't necessarily feel myself, but one might ask, right? I'm sort of thinking the person who's sort of really committed to the thought that no, it's still self-interest. Why isn't meaning in life just a different kind of pleasure or a different kind of fulfillment, such that it could be subsumed under a sort of happiness goal?
Well, that's that's really a good and important question. And I guess the first thing to say is it's not, I didn't mean to suggest it has nothing, that there is no benefit to me of doing what I love doing, especially that I love doing and feel is worth doing. So so it's not that, and maybe the best way to deal with this is to say there's self-interest, meaning whatever is best for yourself or for living a flourishing life. But I don't identify happiness with self-interest. So I guess part of the point is it's not pleasure, right? So even though I get something very rewarding out of making my daughter happy, and something very rewarding out of writing a better philosophy article than I would have if I had stopped at the second draft. It's not pleasure that I get. At least it's not in any obvious way. There's a lot of stress there, right? And the other thing to point out is that these things are in my self-interest. In a way, in that meaning, I mean, living a meaningful life is something that I regard as good for me. It's a dimension of self-interest, as I would put it. But two things to say next to that are, first of all, whether it may not be maximizing my self-interest. It might be that, look, my life would go as well if I stopped at the second draft and went hiking than if I said, no, I'm not going to go hiking. I'm going to keep working till I really feel good about this article, feel good, not in the sense of happy, but like I've got the article, I'm saying what I want to be saying, or I'm saying what I think is really true, or I'm right. So it's not that it's against my self-interest. It's that I'm not thinking about, how to make myself as happy as possible, or even what's best for me. I'm outside of myself in terms of my guidance. And actually, the second thing I wanted to say was connected to that even though I get something out of it, I'm directed at something outside of myself. And that's how attached to something larger than yourself seems to me to be connected to my view. It's just not identified with my view.
That's helpful. And apologies, the theologian in me can't help but try to then push the same thing from the moralist side, and at least ask how is it meaning in life simply another, I don't know, it's like quite another form of morality, but why wouldn't we want to say maybe it is a moral responsibility to, for example, realize one's most authentic self, or in this sort of way that like sort of finding these things there is some sort of moral duty, or even that what we're discovering when we find these sorts of projects or endeavors is we're finding something that has sort of moral worth to it. I'm asking questions I'm not sure I'm totally invested in, but I wonder, there might be pushback on that side as well.
Right. So right. I think in terms of morality and what one has a duty to do, there are substantive disagreements between, across the world about this. And if you think the only thing worth doing is to serve other people or to serve the sentient universe, then it may be that the only thing you can get meaning from is that. And I mean, I suppose if you think, look, that's all that's worth doing, and people who think it's worth, creating a beautiful garden, or a beautiful painting, or writing philosophy that only, a small number of people will read. If they don't think that's worth doing, and people who think that it is worth doing are mistaken, then they will not think that those of us who do actually spend time, trying to create art or expand the, or philosophy or history or whatever, they won't think that our lives are meaningful. It's because I don't have those views. First of all, I don't think, I don't think we have a duty to do as much as possible for the world. I do think we have a duty to do something for the world, to do our share, so to speak, whatever that is. And we don't always know what that is. And if we're lucky, we not only have a duty, but we enjoy doing that. And so we get meaning and morality at the same time there. They overlap. But, some of us have other passions that are also, in my opinion, worth doing and good for the world, even though they don't maximize, happiness or something. So, I mean, I think the world without art, for example, or if would be a much less good place.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm asking these questions mostly just to try to understand the nuance of the argument. I'm persuaded, and as I said, I find this. You talk about this sort of third. Am I right to maybe talk about like a third source of motivation, or sort of?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's or motivated by sequence happiness, motivated to contribute, or to do the moral good, do one's moral duty. In this case, motivated in the case of meaning, motivated by love, and you invoke this category of love's reasons. I find it so evocative. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about why have some philosophers found it difficult to keep these sorts of reasons in view? I think you mentioned a little bit that's not necessarily like in every philosopher's vocabulary to talk about love's reasons. And what do you think we gain by taking them as seriously as you have?
Well, part of it is, I think, something you've already touched on, which is that when someone does something out of love, you get some there's something, there's a way in which you can see that as connected to self-interest. So often, I think when people say, I love, I'm doing this for my daughter because I love her, they say, well, so that's just sort of, they kind of fold that into self-interest, that either, there are different views of self-interest here. One is you get happiness from making your daughter happy, which is true, but and therefore, when you do something for your daughter, it's just, you're really doing it for yourself. And another form of another theory of self-interest is when you fulfill your own desires, they're your desires. It's because you want to do it that you're doing it, and therefore it's really for your sake. I think that's just a fallacy. Doing it, if your desire is to help someone else, you're not doing it for your sake. Your sake isn't the only thing that matters to you. And in terms of doing something for your daughter, yes, you do get some joy out of it, but whether you get as much joy out of helping your daughter as if you I'll give you a different anecdote, and that might help. One of my favorite examples of motherly love is also comes from my mother, who when I was young, if for some reason we had a cupcake to split, right? If she was splitting a cupcake with me, she would split it horizontally and give me the top with all the frosting. Now, it was not because she didn't like frosting. It was because she cared about me and the fact that I liked frosting more than she cared about the pleasure of having the frosting for herself. I thought, yes, that is a perfect example of kind of, what love is. So it's, it was her choice. It was her decision. Is she happier having given me the top half than if she just split it the way most people would, which is the way I would split it with my husband for sure, which is vertically. I don't know how to answer that. And I don't know if she knows how to answer that, but like, she's not even thinking about that. She's thinking about what she cares about most, not about what she will be happiest doing. So, it's kind of a simple example, but anyway, I think the reason people don't talk about love as a third motive is because they think it's just part of the first motive of self-interest. And then the other reason people don't talk about love historically is it was a very, philosophy, like many other disciplines, but maybe especially, was a very male field of inquiry. And at least for, many centuries, love was just not on the radar as something that it would be, that they weren't thinking about it, and B, it didn't seem serious enough or rational enough to talk about in philosophy. I should say that, that's changed. There are lots more women in philosophy, and so that's helped bring love and friendship and the importance of love into things. But one of the most important contemporary philosophers who actually used the phrase reasons of love before I did is Harry Frankfurt, a male. And so, I don't want to badmouth men as having nothing to do with love.
But no, if we're going to speak honestly about academic habits of mind, we need to think about who academics are as whole human beings, and that certainly includes gender identities and how they're thinking within and about their categories of masculinity and femininity. That's certainly true. All right, so we've talked a lot sort of around it, but I wonder if we can come squarely to your proposal here. So as I said, you sort of frame your proposal in some sort of conversation with the fulfillment view, find your passion and pursue it, and the larger than oneself view, contribute your life to something larger than yourself. These two things will help you. Or these are two proposals for how you might find meaning in your life. And you want to affirm certain things about both of these, and then you also sort of offer your own sort of account of what you think we could say sort of generally about meaning in life. I don't know, it'd be helpful. You offer definitions at a couple of points, but one of them you say, meaning arises from loving objects worthy of love and engaging with them in a positive way. How would you want to sort of define sort of meaning in life as you understand it, maybe even in counter-distinction to these two other views?
Right. Right. Counter-distinction, it's really it's almost a way of, as I see it, it's taking the best out of both of those views and seeing how they actually can combine in a unified way. As you say, one way I put the view is engaging in things you love that are worthy of love. So the engaging in things you love is, I think, very close to find your passion and go for it. It's it's find something that fulfills you, as opposed to that you just enjoy. You might say, look, I enjoy watching Seinfeld reruns or something, but that's not, fulfilling. It's probably not. So that's, but my thought about the fulfillment view by itself is that, well, it depends on what kinds of things do fulfill you. There's, in some other work, I talk about the example of Sisyphus, a paradigm of a meaningless activity. Sisyphus rolls the stone up the hill, it rolls back down, he has to roll it up the hill, rolls back down. There's a philosopher who actually, started me thinking about the view I ended up with, who talks about Sisyphus and gives this thought experiment. Imagine that even though the gods had condemned Sisyphus to eternally roll that stone up the hill and it would roll down, and to that activity, what if they took pity on him and inserted something in his veins that made him love it, right? That made him feel fulfilled by rolling that stone up the hill, watching it roll down, rolling it up again. According to that philosopher, Richard Taylor, well, then you've got, that is as good as it gets, right? That's, you're fine. Sisyphus now has the passion to do exactly what he is doing and is pursuing it to his life's content, his heart's content. But as I see it, that is not a meaningful life. You're, rolling up a hill, rolling a stone up the hill futilely because it won't even, is not. So it was an example of, look, if you were fulfilled by something worthless, it would not be meaningful from the outside. And if you came to recognize that it was worthless, it would not be meaningful from the inside anymore. I mean, maybe you would stop being fulfilled by it. So that sort of led me to think, all right, so fulfillment has a lot to do with living a meaningful life. It's connected to authenticity, I think, but not maybe identical to that. But that's why I added, you want to do something you love that's worthy of love, and that you, in some way, your loving it is connected with its worthiness of love. So when you love your daughter, you recognize that that your daughter is worth loving, it's not like loving, I don't know, some piece of rag that you just, kind of insanely have an attachment to or got hypnotized to love or something. So, and I guess I think the same goes for philosophy. So the thought was, it's not just love, it's the worthiness of love. Yeah. And then I interpret that second view we talked about earlier, larger than your life, get attached to something larger than your life, as not actually, I suppose one version is get in love with, is to think of that literally as something larger than your life, larger than you. Now, obviously, there's one way you can think of Sisyphus as stone. If it's a really big stone, that would be larger than you. But it's not. But even I don't even think it has to be larger than you in value. I think if a person devotes their life to caring for, let's say a disabled partner, just one person, no larger than the person the carer and the person being cared for, or, one isn't any larger than the other. But I think that's certainly, I think that's an example of a way life could be very meaningful. So I don't think it really has to be larger than your life. I think it has to be other than your life and valuable in itself. So my thought is, as long as something is worthy of love and not so minor as to make it like, how can you spend your whole life caring for this goldfish or something? That's what meaning is. So as you say, one way I put it is, you get meaning insofar as you're engaged with activities that you love, that are worthy of love, and can do something positive with that. Another kind of slogan that I use is, Meaning arises when subjective attraction meets objective attractiveness. So the subjective attraction is the love, the objective attractiveness is the worthiness of the love.
Yeah, I was just about to point us there. Yeah, I find that really, really pithy and really captures something really powerful. We just got a question here in the Q&A, which again, I think is right where we want to go, which is, who judges if something or an action is valuable? Or I take it this question about objectively attractive, objective attractiveness, or worthy of love. That I found myself both attracted to that, and then also like immediately these questions arise of who judges that objective value? How do we think about that? You spend a lot of time in the book wrestling with exactly this question.
Right. Well, it's the $1 million question. I guess I think we should all think about that. I mean, there's several things I can say in response. The first is, I certainly don't want to be or pretend to be like the judge. Being a philosopher doesn't give you any special access to the truth about value. I mean, it may make you think about it more than other people, because that's one of the things we study. But so that's number one. Number two, I certainly don't mean my thinking about meaningfulness and what it is, and having these ideas, it's when you love something worthy of love and so on. I don't want to then go on from having formulated this idea to then go around judging other people's lives and saying, so that one's meaningful, that one not so much, because what they're loving is not worthy of love. The point, I think, of formulating this idea of meaning is to say, look, if everybody gets the idea, that's what I want in life. I want to love something worthy of love and do something good with it. Then everyone should individually, at least, ask themselves, is this worth doing? I love it, but is it worth loving? I mean, usually I think the answer will be yes, but I mean, to take my own example, and I don't think this was, it's accidental that my work is connected to this, is that doing philosophy is one of these things where you might think, really, I mean, lots of people do think this is just garbage, like there are never any answers. Like, why are you doing this? Like, isn't this stupid for people to go around asking themselves, could I be dreaming now? How do I know I'm not dreaming? I mean, there is a way people look at a lot of philosophical questions that make them seem ridiculous, a waste of time. Because I know that there's that way, and because I can even understand how they could think that way. It is a question I ask myself. I mean, I love doing it, but can I justify it? That's a way of asking, is it worth doing? I mean, of course I could justify it if I thought, well, I can just do whatever I want, but that's not, I mean, that wasn't it's not hurting anybody. But if I didn't think there was something worthwhile in the project, I wouldn't do it. So I am an example of someone asking myself about the activities that, without thinking pre-reflectively, I love doing. Is it worth doing? And if the answer, if I didn't, I mean, you have to worry about, wish fulfillment. I could convince myself that it's worth doing even if it isn't, but you try to avoid that. You try to be careful. And if the answer is no, this is kind of a waste of time, or then you shift your life a little bit. So that is kind of the point of having this theory, that not that I should answer what's valuable, but that everyone should at least think about it in trying to figure out how to live their lives.
Yeah.
But then, I don't know if you want me to stop. I mean, there is also the philosophical question. Well, it would be nice if we pursue the question of what's worth doing together as a community. And, and the way that, you start with each person starts with their own maybe intuitions. These things are valuable, these things are not. And then they talk to each other and listen to each other and watch what other people find valuable and try to learn and expand their ideas. And also challenge, I mean, it goes both ways. You know, one thing that can happen is you do something that you love, and then someone, maybe your mother, says, why are you wasting your time on that? You know, that might lead you to think, you know, I can't really justify this. This really isn't worth the time I'm putting into it. But the other alternate, and so sometimes you change it by rejecting your views of what was valuable. I think more often, at least in my own experience, if you actually ask someone, you know, what's in, you know, what do you see in that? Then, though it's often hard to articulate it, you come to recognize that there is something valuable that you didn't appreciate beforehand. So it's more likely to expand our sense of what's worth doing than to narrow it, I think. So as I say, it can go both ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that charity, which you express in the book. I think in some of your interactions with some of your interlocutors, you take up in the back half of the book, sort of thinking about horse riding or these sorts of potential, you know, and you think, well, I don't know, all things being equal, I'm inclined to think that if I, did I say equined to think? Anyway, I'm inclined to think that if I spend some time talking with some folks invested in equestrian, that I might grow an appreciation for what value is there, just as much as I might, or even more likely than I would convince them to ask some questions about whether what they were doing was as valuable as they had taken it to be. And I should say I appreciate and commend to the audience your essay or your paper article, The Meanings of Lives, in which you sort of imagine precisely that in our friendships, at least, we might want this from one another, even, right? If I'm living a life that seems to be somehow, I'm frittering away my life in the view of someone who knows me well and cares for me and wants good things for me, I would want them to bring this to my attention and to have a conversation about it and to maybe provoke me to ask some questions or maybe give some answers, you know, to a friend that might help them better understand my investment, help me better understand my own investment, might lead me to change the way that I do invest my time and energy, or change my perspective on what it is I'm hoping to get out of these kinds of investments. You also make clear in the book that meaning, of course, is not the only kind of good thing that we might pursue in life. We might well do some things that only because we find them pleasurable. We might well do some things only because we think we are duty bound to do them, whether or not we find fulfillment in them. And so anyway, just to give folks a sort of, I think that's a really generous sort of spirit and character of your writing, which I really, really appreciate. And I think frames some of these harder questions about if there's anyone I would, and I think my students, when they interact with your work, I think also find, well, if there's anyone they're going to let sort of push them on this, maybe there is such a thing as an objectively valuable thing. I think it's you, because of the spirit with which you do that. And it has this sort of generosity of, okay, well, maybe Professor Wolf suggests that I think this way, and maybe I could do it, because there's this sort of generosity. You're inviting us into sort of, well, you don't, I think at one point you push back. You're not happy with an entirely intersubjective solution to the question of source of value. You do seem to invite us deeply into intersubjective sort of dialogue and conversation as we try to wrestle with these questions.
Right. I should say, I mean, you mentioned how we might be grateful if a friend pushes us towards, towards thinking about these questions, either challenging us about the value of our activities or teaching us about the value of activities we were judging badly. I think even more obvious for parents is, I mean, if the questioner, for example, was skeptical, like, don't you think anything is equally valuable? Or like, shouldn't we just say whatever people love is valuable for them and stop there? As a parent, it's very hard to do that. I mean, if you see your child is spending, all of their time playing a certain video game or following a boy band, concert schedule. Now, I mean, again, you could push back on those examples and say, look, there is some value to that. And I know there is some value to that, and there can be, depends on how it's done. Still, as a parent, you look at what your child is doing. I mean, my thought is, as a parent, I mean, one of the actual upshots of my view is, one thing that one should do as a parent is introduce one's child to all kinds of potential sources of passion, try soccer, try art, try, all kinds of things that are, maybe a chemistry set or whatever, will get them to find something they love that they will then, build meaning on, or many things they love. And of course, other people, get them to, make friends and stuff like that. So it's important to expose them to the things that they might love. But if somehow they end up devoting too much time on something that you think is really a very questionable value, it's very hard to say, well, I'm a relativist about value. If that's what my child loves, that'll be fine. You tend, at an earlier age, at least, to try to steer them or, introduce them to things that you think, now that would be a great thing to, to shape a life around, rather than this other thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think this helps me, as I think, again, without the benefit of this careful discussion, I've found myself thinking over the years, and even telling my students, we spend a lot of time talking about, about morality in my courses. But I often tell them, like, at the end of the day, I mean, we might live immoral lives, even evil lives. We should concern ourselves with that, I suppose. But I'm less worried that my students are going to live evil lives than that they're going to live trivial lives. That they're going to get caught up in things that aren't worthy of their humanity and of them, and it's not because I have a low estimation of them, oh, they're so foolish. I have a high estimation of their worth and the worthiness of their lives, such that finding something, I mean, maybe trivial is too harsh a word, but the sort of concern and a real, I suppose, the positive side of that, maybe I should change my rhetoric to the positive, right? A real eager desire that they find meaning of the sort that you're talking about. Again, it's just another, in thinking about my own language, and we think, oh, I have been operating with this as a sort of distinct category, identifiably separate from, yeah, I hope they would be happy. I hope they would be moral. But there's this other sort of concern that they not fall into sort of triviality that might not be immoral, that might well make them quite happy. There's this other thing that you're really helping me give some language to.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think it was looking at my students and what they were aiming for, that was part of my wanting to go into this subject in the first place. I mean, when I started thinking about this, I was teaching at Johns Hopkins at the time. Excellent students, very hardworking, very, but they were kind of, this is an overgeneralization. But they were just working to, succeed, as opposed to feel fulfilled. They were trying to get good grades, to get into a good graduate school, to get a good job that would pay them a lot of money, with probably the idea that success and money would lead them to happiness. They weren't immoral. They were doing, they weren't doing anything, morally objectionable, or at least not that I was aware of, right? But and maybe this is, not uncommon when you're 18, you're just trying to develop your skills so that you can figure out what to do later. But I did feel like you don't have something on your radar that is really important to ultimate flourishing, namely, is success and money, going to lead to something that I guess in your, we could use your vocabulary, that isn't trivial, and that, and of course they would be much happier if they find something. I mean, one of the worries is they work really hard to get to the next stage, and then they make it, and then a feeling of emptiness, comes because they think, what's so good about this? And so there's also this worry that they're heading for a fall by not having what I'm calling meaningfulness in their focus at all.
Yeah, I mean, because we have all these structures in our lives that socially that sort of reinforce. We're talking about, in both of these instances, sort of elite academia, and sort of undergraduates coming through those spaces, I think, are especially often embedded within these sorts of social worlds that are, I think, celebrating various forms of what I might call triviality, right, as sort of acquisition of wealth for its own sake. I think is actually, at the end of the day, that is a trivial, that is an unworthy sort of endeavor. And so, yeah, you can get accolade, you can be celebrated, and the sort of intersubjectivity won't necessarily save you there, because you're embedded precisely within sort of corrupt social environments, which again, you talk about in the book, and it makes you sort of want to push again at the sort of objectively, the objectivity of value that needs to ground this from some sort of source. I have two questions. Maybe we can briefly get to each of these last two questions. One is I found myself, and we've talked a lot about sort of potential disagreements about objective value. And I wondered how the category of meaning in life might help us actually think about those disagreements. For example, you talk often in the book about political or social projects being potential sources of meaning in life. But we know that one person's valuable political project may work directly against someone else's valuable political project. All we have to do is think about myriad Supreme Court decisions that have come down in recent weeks. Does meaning in life help us to recognize someone's life as meaningful? Should a pro-choice advocate recognize a pro-life advocate's work as meaningful if misguided? Or how would you see this category sort of helping us think about those sorts of disagreements?
An interesting question. So there's one way I can interpret the question that I might be able to answer, and another that I won't. One way one could understand my views on meaning is such that, like, if you think that a person's project is wrong-headed, like you're supporting the wrong view, or you're devoting yourself to, you're in a religion that a person regards as a false religion or something, you might say, well, therefore, even though they think it's meaningful from the inside, it's subjectively fulfilling, it's not. It's like Sisyphus doesn't realize that Rolling Stone, the fulfilled Sisyphus, thinks it's great, but he's mistaken. It's not. It's worthless, right? So you might think what they're doing is worthless and therefore not meaningful. I don't think that's necessarily the way one should think about these things, because usually, there are different aspects to what the person is doing that one could pull out. It's not all like, so in the case of people with different political views, you can describe what they're doing as they're supporting a anti-abortion society, and if you think, as I do, that the pro-choice view is the right view, then you'll think, well, they're doing something wrong and bad and hurt, and right, and they are. From my view, they are. On the other hand, they are engaging with, they're showing moral integrity if they, this is something they believe in seriously. If they're doing it in a a kind way, if they're increasing communication. I mean, there are ways you can be on the opposite side of a political issue that nonetheless you can recognize the positive aspects to also, and you say, well, there's some meaning in it. It's just not the same meaning that the person themselves might identify. So I don't think we have to say, if you have the wrong religion, then whatever you put under that category is, unbeknownst to you, worthless. If you have the wrong political view, whatever you do fighting for it is worthless. Even if you're on the wrong side of a war, I mean, displays of courage, displays of altruism to protect your fellow soldiers, whatever. I mean, there is value in those things, even if there's also disvalue at the same time. And meaning doesn't require, it's not a kind of all or nothing thing. So that's the way I would feel about these issues. I wouldn't think only one of you can be doing something meaningful if you're on opposite sides. On the other hand, I don't know how the view about meaning can help us settle these questions. I mean, I don't, right, that's for another part.
No, I think what you helped us see there is how the view about meaning could actually help us be generous in looking for sort of sources of meaning, notwithstanding our moral disagreement. Okay, I might recognize other ways in which the actions and pursuits of someone I disagree with profoundly on something of importance might nevertheless still be meaningful, not just for them, but meaningful. Yeah. I'll try to squeeze this one in under the wire. It's probably unwise, but I'm so drawn to this question. You say at one point, if one is lucky, one will find that find involvement of the sort that you're talking about fulfilling, and if that happens, then one's life will both be and seem meaningful. First of all, I just love that you draw that distinction, which I'm always trying to help my students draw between feeling fulfilled and being fulfilled, or a sense of meaning in life versus having a meaningful life. Those are really important distinctions, which we've been talking about. But I also wonder, why should we hope to? It does seem like it would take some luck to happen, that we would find ourselves to have these two aspects of meaning sort of coming together in this way. Why should we hope to? You seem hopeful about this. Why should we hope to be so lucky?
Well, why should we hope? Do you mean? I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you thinking why care about being rather than just seeming meaningful, or do you mean why are you optimistic that?
Yeah, why are you optimistic that it seems that you're full of examples of people who find meaningful lives, and it just strikes me like when you use that word luck, it is rather fortunate, right, that these things do end up aligning. Maybe I'm thinking back to Friedrich Buchner's line about the place where these two things come together, and we are contributing to something greater than ourselves, and we all also are finding fulfillment. And it seems to me that meaning, you think, does bring these two things together, and it seems in a certain way quite ubiquitous. I mean, obviously not universal, but it's available. It seems to be broadly available in the world.
Right. Well, I think part of it is because I think a lot of value is created by human nature and human community are sources of what I think of as objective value. Mm-hmm. So that if your human constitution is, not seriously damaged by either trauma or, just there are all kinds of bad luck, poverty, can keep you from having the chance to find something you love that's worth loving. But I think if we can get the social world to cooperate, the idea of creating a world in which most people have the benefit of being able to find something meaningful to do with their lives that will be both worth doing and fulfilling is, yeah, it's attainable. It's a very John Stuart Mill kind of thought.
Well, Susan, thank you so much. Thank you again for the book, and thank you for this conversation, and really for the way that you've taken up these questions over many years in this really generous, charitable sort of way. Thank you for the conversations that you open up, and thank you for this conversation today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise. And thanks to all of you joining us here live or later watching and recording. Hope that you will join us in the future for more faith initiative events here at Grace Farms. So until then, be well and see you in the next one.